All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we take a look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly obscure, and try to help you figure out how to best use these things in your life to help you with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health, your awakening, your formation of a holistic worldview. And today is the 5th day that we've been going over the history called It's After the End of the World. Don't you know that yet? And this introduces a lot of the work of some great jazz musicians, so-called, back in the middle of the 20th century, who have gone back to their African roots and attempted to kind of resurrect the spiritual aspects of their craft, which had been kind of marginalized in the ensuing century of kind of industrial music and commercial music. And we are in chapter 1 here, which is called Calling Planet Earth, about some of the background of Sun Ra. And we're talking about Bronzeville, Chicago, down south side of Chicago, and most particularly the race ideal. So really the black imitation of white institutions, along with the championing of those same black institutions over the white institutions. So it's not only is it an imitation, but it's, I guess, intended to be a better imitation. And so we'll just get into it and see what happens. This race ideal, which was originally referring to just businesses on the South Side, in particular endorsing and shady business practices that were still championed, if it didn't matter what the basic ethics were, as long as they provided goods and services to the race, then they were okay. So this race ideal saw its most ironic side in the caste discrimination that occurred among the race. One need only peruse the Defender, Chicago Daily Defender, black newspaper there in Bronzeville, to see the ethic of imitation, starting with dozens of ads for skin whitener and hair straightener. As one popular Bronzeville saying went, if you're white, you're right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're black, get back. Sometimes the standard used was to look at the veins. If the skin was light enough to see blue in the veins, then the person was called a payola, or a blue blood, and was considered light enough to associate with the elite and the sporting classes of the race. Indeed, in the cabarets and even in black-owned establishments, dark-skinned blacks could not even be hired as bartenders, much less musicians. Still, while the ethic of race seems duplicitous, it succeeded in building a strong sense of community in Bronzeville. If you were colored and you were doing something to advance the race, then the Defender was sure to be singing your praises. Continuing efforts begun by the black orchestras under Major N. Clark Smith at the turn of the century, the Defender was central to developing the emerging black professions: doctors, lawyers, barbers, Pullman porters, and musicians. Even more sweeping, the Defender was central to creating a mythology that kept a sense of spirituality alive even as urban secularism increased. According to the Defender's race myth, blacks were the chosen people just out of bondage, who needed to make an exodus. In this modern mythology, though, the exodus was not a parting of the sea, but instead was accomplished via the Illinois Central Railroad to a promised land of machine politics, professionalism, factory wages, and mass-produced goods. By World War II, however, the promised land was overcrowding and the race myth was becoming obsolete. Still, the strength of black institutions kept a strong sense of harmony alive in Chicago. This section is called Bronzeville in Representation. Sonny, or Sun Ra, did not need the race myth, though, for he had his own worldview and mythology. His return to Chicago, 12 or so years after the conversion experience, reveals a strategic plan of action. First, it was necessary for him to look for like-minded musicians, to establish himself among the professional musicians community and among other influential people on the scene. Sonny, however, found it hard to fit in. After circulating his name as a new piano player in town at the Colored Musicians Local 208 house, one of the first jobs he got was with singer Lil Green. On the first night, the fact that Sonny neither smoked nor drank on the car ride to the gig was enough to make him stand out among the other musicians. His radical difference became even more obvious when he saw that Howard Callender, Lil Green's husband, happened to be wearing a large crucifix around his neck. Another band member remembers the incident. Quote, Sonny started on Howard right away, saying, "How can you wear that cross glorifying what they did to Jesus? It's one thing to kill the man, but to wear that symbol to remember it by is something else." Callender reportedly chased Sonny, threatening to kill him. Nevertheless, Green liked Sonny as a pianist, and he stayed with her for a number of dates. In order to carry out his strategy, it was also necessary for Sonny to do a lot of observing, to gauge how people, white, black, and alien, behaved around Chicago. He did this first by getting a couple of jobs via the union, working on the road. Even given his earlier experiences in Chicago, the extent of mob and machine control over black musicians must have been staggering compared to what he was used to in Birmingham. The influence of crime in the cabarets dominated Bronzeville life so much that over the years, thousands of blacks had taken advantage of the criminal activity for their own entrepreneurial purposes. Dozens of shady, black-owned entertainment clubs opened in Chicago after 1904. After World War I, more scrupulous, race-oriented entertainment houses also opened, especially on the Stroll, a famous area of State Street between 31st and 35th, where it was always light and one could see people from all over the world. Bill Bottoms, for example, strove to establish a club, quote, free from the degrading and contaminating influences which are usually present in most cabarets. Both the black-owned cabarets and the white-owned sporting houses were able to coexist until about 1921. Then, according to Ted Vincent, Bill Bottoms hired Anton Lada's band, a white group from New Orleans. For Bottoms, this was just a logical business tactic. To the mob, though, Bottoms had overstepped his bounds onto their turf. Intimidating rumors began immediately to circulate, alleging that Bottoms was being forced out. Then, in Vincent's words, the mob took over the territory. Soon thereafter, one of Bottoms' bartenders was murdered in cold blood, forcing Bottoms to shut down. Within the next year, several other black-owned establishments were closed down because of firebombs or other intimidation. As a result of this turf war, black cultural life was forced to grow in the midst of destructive conditions imposed by the syndicates, in particular their, quote, entertainment plantations, known by whites as slumming resorts. As Dempsey Travis remembers, quote, talented musicians were chained to bands and specific nightclubs and saloons in the same manner as the antebellum Negroes were shackled to plantations, end quote. Lured by black music from New Orleans, adventurous white elites would pay steep prices to take the forbidden journey to the South Side to see the exotic under controlled conditions. While the mob usually paid the musicians well and gave them a chance to make a living playing their own music, the entertainment plantation still controlled the representation of the music. Black musicians were expected to generate a primitive sexual atmosphere. Gyrations, grunts, and snorts were part of the occupational requirements in the slumming resorts. The constant presence of organized crime prompted Chicago's South Side residents to adopt a don't ask, don't tell policy toward it. Since Bronzevilleans were inundated and intimidated by organized crime, they just didn't talk about it, lest they be, quote, found in an alley somewhere. A few musicians actually got in on the business end, but typically the musicians were ambivalent. Since all that was required was consent, a kind of intentional ignorance, silence on the part of the musicians led into a cycle of corruption, consumption, addiction, and enslavement. Typically, for a musician, the more you supported the racketeers, the more the racketeers supported you. So even those who opposed the crime rings did so behind closed doors. If you openly defied the mob, you risked, quote, being found dead in Jackson Park. The entertainment plantations entailed a great deal of disagreeable work for a conscientious musician, so conscience had to be reduced or eliminated. By paying the musicians generously, providing them with easy access to liquor, drugs, sex, gamblings, and guns, and giving them occasional windfalls of easy money, the syndicates were able to convince many musicians to overlook their consciences. This situation did harm to black music, for while the black musicians were important to their whole community, most whites shunned them, and the music was only important as amusement to the white sporting crowd. These sports were the same class of people who coined the word jazz when they first heard black music in the posh whorehouses of the Storyville red light district of New Orleans. In Chicago, the rich sporting audiences were attracted to other vices too: prostitution, gambling, drugs, and guns. In their effort to get ahead, most of the very best black musicians gave their services to the white sporting houses because they could afford to pay the most money. One academic report at the time asserted that if the black musician wanted to make a decent living, he needed to play mostly to white audiences. The mob's overwhelming influence can be seen in the life of band leader Earl Hines, who ran the most successful and most influential Chicago band from the late 1920s until the mid-1940s. Hines's musical lineage came directly from the New Orleans source of jazz. He worked with King Oliver and helped make jazz history through his long association with Louis Armstrong. Because of his addictions to the nightlife of show business, however, Hines encouraged a race worldview, and his band continued to endorse institutional power as a matter of course. Hines summarized his consent as "see no evil." There were coercive factors in Hines' consent, too. Working in mafia-controlled clubs carried the constant threat of gunfights, and if you got on the wrong side of one of the mobsters, through debt or jealousy over women, you could be found, quote, with your kneecaps broken or lying in a ditch somewhere. Moreover, in the tug-of-war between the mob and the police, the musicians were often in between as the rope. White musician Marty Clausen describes an engagement at the Brass Rail, a Chicago cabaret. Quote, that club was owned by the world's biggest company. I think you know who I mean. Some of them were featured in The Godfather. And what was the occasion? It was the retirement party for Chicago's police commissioner. What a room full of strange bedfellows. On one end of the long main table were the highest ranking police and political figures in Chicago, and on the other end, those guys. Also, Hines, as band leader, often took the fall for the club's practices. For some time during Prohibition, the Grand Terrace, the club Hines' band played in, was raided by the police every single night. Hines got to the point where he would run out to the paddy wagon so that he could get a good seat for the trip to the police station, which was nothing more than a formality to demonstrate the existence of law enforcement. The musicians would be back at the club in time to play the next show that same night. The entertainment plantations could also get more nerve-wracking. Hines described a harried gangster on the run throwing him a $12,000 bag of money for safekeeping. The next day, upon safe return of the bag, the gangster gave Hines a quick $500 for his trouble. Hines was more liable to see no evil because mobsters were big spenders and music lovers, so tips would be plentiful. When Al Capone entered a cabaret, the musicians' eyes lit up because they knew it was time for a large windfall in tips. All that was necessary was to play his favorite songs, quote, sappy sentimental numbers. Even when Capone was not present, though, Hines operated according to a professional ethic. Give the audience exactly what they want to hear. The syndicate was not the only group to convince Hines to arrange institutional worldviews for them. In 1930, Hines' band was one of the first to broadcast nationally over the radio. A nationwide jingle for Heinz 57 sauce. Hines' worldview also extended to lifestyle, in which he suffered from various occupational hazards. Hines suffered frequent bouts with alcoholism and had a major gambling problem that kept him perpetually in debt. His vanity put him in the barbershop every day, and he participated in competition with other band leaders to see who had the largest wardrobe. These factors had great importance as the media recorded and reproduced them ad nauseum. Hines and his band were heroes among impressionable youth across the country who emulated their behavior. Hines' ethic of see no evil is perhaps most clearly seen in his laissez-faire attitude toward his musicians. While his predecessors in the black orchestral tradition employed a round-the-clock paternal relationship, Hines was more egalitarian. As long as the musicians were on time and sober enough for the gig, and they executed the music and the show, they could do anything they wanted. To maintain control, Hines set up a rigid system of fines for infractions, designed to hurt the sidemen in the wallet, but not to affect the personal relationships between band and band leader. The fines were nothing personal, only business. Indeed, Hines often went out partying with the musicians after hours. Hines' rules reflected the growing rejection of authority by urban blacks, a trend that Sonny strongly opposed. So this section is called Sonny's Return to Bronzeville. The Bronzeville environment had not changed much by 1946 when Sonny returned. One job that stayed in Sonny's mind from the early Chicago days was in Calumet City, a mob stronghold. Sonny was hired to play piano for a striptease act. Adding insult to injury, he had to play behind an iron curtain, which shielded the black musicians from the audience and from the white woman on stage. With no apparent bitterness, Sonny remembered, I had to find out about the white race, so I had to investigate them. So I went and took me a job in a burlesque club, so I could see what they're doing down there. I had to find out, what are the hillbillies doing? $10 per night, but I didn't care. I was doing my research. Sonny meant research more literally than we might expect, as bassist Richard Davis recalls. It was a burlesque house in Calumet City, the bumps and grinds of females, you know. See, there was kind of a screen between us and the dancer. We could see her through a veiled curtain of some type so that the drummer would catch bumps and things like that. But the thing that impressed me about Sun Ra was that for the whole time, this was like what you call a factory job. He would be reading a paperback book for the whole time he was playing. And he'd turn the pages, you know, and play and never missed a beat. Turning the pages and reading. I said, this guy is phenomenal. Moreover, one of his sidemen remembers that Sun Ra would play the striptease music during the show, but in between shows, he would play out. One time, Sun Ra claimed, one of the customers kept hollering up there for the piano player. Give the piano player a solo. Well, you know, it was just background, and then the manager had to stop the show and ask them what they want me to play. A customer said, Claire de Lune, and so I played it. And he came up, he gave me $50. He said I had a classical touch. He and his friend was arguing about that. His friend said, no, I wouldn't be playing in a club like that. I didn't know nothing about classical and all that. And then they had this bet on. So then I played Claire de Lune. So they came up, they gave me $50 and said it was the best it had ever been played. That happened to me. So you see, it jumps on over into somewhere else with me. A lot of unknown incidents jump up in my so-called life. A much more long-term engagement for Sonny was at the Club de Lisa, a white-owned South Side show club where pianist Albert Ammons had also worked from 1934 to 1937. Ammons was famous in the black community for his participation in the rent party circuit, beginning around 1920. The rent party transplanted the Saturday night juke ritual on the southern plantation. A tenant or friendly landlady would announce a party and hire a piano player. Many households had pianos. They could often be had for as little as $10. The piano player could be had for $1, tips, and all the food and drink he could consume. The host would often sell 4-ounce glasses of moonshine whiskey and or home-cooked food to raise the money to pay the rent, which was often imminent. Because of South Side overcrowding, it was a common practice for landlords to evict upon one missed rent payment. The rent party was a group effort to help keep people in their homes and to keep musicians working. At its height, several hundred piano players were able to subsist on the rent party circuit, where their authority was not jeopardized by institutional forces. Albert Ammons was one of the great rent party pianists, but at the de Lisa, it became increasingly necessary that he be able to do the show, to play orchestral arrangements in representation, to accompany dancers, comedians, and other variety acts. Ammons' individual mastery of the piano was not enough for black show business on the South Side. Ammons got a job leading a band at the de Lisa, but was released when he could not represent in the way owner Mike de Lisa demanded. Ammons was replaced by show drummer, bandleader Red Saunders. Under Red Saunders, the 1937 to 45 and 47 to 56, the de Lisa blossomed into one of the major South Side show clubs. The de Lisa was typical of the white-owned Chicago jazz establishments in that the owners were very supportive of the music, but because of their minor league dealings with organized crime, they did violence to the music even while they tried to present it fairly. During Saunders' hiatus in 1946, Sonny got his chance as an arranger for floor shows. Mike de Lisa's replacement for Saunders was an aging Fletcher Henderson, the founder of orchestral swing and a hero to Sonny. Like out of a storybook, Sonny attended every one of Henderson's shows, memorized the songs, told Henderson of his admiration, and talked to Henderson about some of his own original compositions. Sonny was given his chance when Marl Young, the regular pianist and a law student who studied and slept in his car between shows, was absent. One night, said Sonny, he was in a car asleep and they didn't know where he was, so Fletcher sent for me. Sonny volunteered his services and impressed Henderson enough to get the regular job. The other musicians in Fletcher's band were not as impressed. Sun Ra recalled, Fletcher Henderson's fellows always said to me, you play those strange chords. Why don't you just play like a piano player? And I said, well, Fletcher plays piano. He likes the way I play and hired me. And you just play horns, so you should shut up. I think a piano player would know what I'm capable of, and he likes what I'm doing. So the next night, I got me a straight razor, and I put it right on the piano by one of the trumpet players, and I said, tonight I'm going to cut somebody's head off if they say something about my playing, because I'm very evil tonight. I've got to do something to teach these humans don't mess with me. Certainly, for a conscientious objector, Sonny had an eccentric conception of nonviolence. It was born out of his inverted interpretations of the Bible. Since he believed that the Creator, quote, the Creator does not care about righteousness, he did not take Gandhi's strict doctrine of ahimsa literally. In later days, he sometimes snapped, this is not Reverend King you're dealing with. For him, nonviolence was on an esoteric level, more about deprogramming from the mediated worldview that produced so many violations of being. It was more about non-violation. His task was to self-present and express music that was inviolate, to, quote, demonstrate to people that we can have harmony according to his own worldview. Most musicians complained about his inviolate music, however, because it made it so much harder on them because of his strange chords. One day, he says, I brought 2 arrangements. One was called Chocolate Avenue, a very simple ballad. The other was called Dear Southland, very simple. I put the arrangements there. Fletcher looked at it. It was correct in every respect. 3 hours later, Fletcher said they can't play it. Sonny's music required a higher commitment. He contended that without the spiritual thing, I put the notes down, but they were not played because their hearts weren't right. The problem, said Sonny, was that the musicians were not facing the Creator, but gave allegiance to the desires of the body. Quote, you got the spiritual man and you got the physical black man. He complained that the blacks who are on the artistic plane, the beautiful plane, are at the mercy of those who are on the physical and materialistic. Moreover, he alleged, I don't feel that American whites have really given a certain natural black artist a chance. Because they haven't done that, they don't really understand the black man. Okay, I guess we can try to do a little bit more. This section is called Bronzeville Creativity. Given his feelings about the limitations of white listeners, Sonny decided that he would need to find black people to sponsor him at first. He found these people in Washington Park. Mostly he went there to listen and to read, but occasionally people would call upon him to speak. He recalled, I would go into the park every day and listen to black people talk different things. It was really wonderful in Chicago. Everybody was expressing their opinions, a true democracy in the black community. I'd always be in trouble with black people because I was always talking about space. In the park, he also argued for, quote, a separate kind of human being, the American black man, and I should say that he doesn't belong on the earth. Many ignored him, but one underground black group was impressed by his knowledge, interested in the space rhetoric and in hidden spiritual wisdom. This cabal came to sponsor Sonny and helped him launch the start of his own band. One of the leading sponsors to emerge was a teenager, Alton Abraham. Also included were a number of black Hebrews. Sonny boasted, quote, "My music's being developed without any white person sponsoring it. It's another kind of music. I want it like this to purify our own music. I believe that someday Earth will be invaded by beings from outer space. It will be necessary that people from space and Earthlings teach each other, or else it will be general destruction for us all." With this modest funding, one of his first ventures was in the emergent field of doo-wop. At this time, black urban youth, particularly musicians, were undergoing a heroin epidemic. Sonny remembers, "For a long time, the different races used black musicians and didn't pay them. They paid them off in dope and heroin and stuff. I got the full proof of it, and Billie Holiday didn't make nothing. They paid her off in heroin. Charlie Parker didn't make nothing. They paid him off, and a host of musicians, they reduced them down to be dope addicts." Black musicians did not have to be famous to get trapped. Grail Marcus claims that during the 1950s, there may have been 15,000 doo-wop quartets recorded. These teenagers were given the chance to sing about young love, cars, and various superficial secular topics on record. Many, however, were also getting involved with heroin. To fight back, Sun Ra attempted to take teenage musicians off the street, coach them, mentor them, and convince them to change their lifestyles and sing songs about space for the Creator. One of the doo-wop quartets came to be called the Cosmic Rays, and Sun Ra independently recorded a few songs with them. The venture failed, though, and all of the Cosmic Rays eventually succumbed to the drugs and gangs of street life. Sonny did not give up, though, and over the years, he became a primary influence in getting several other musicians to quit addictive drugs and alcohol. Okay, we're going to stop right there, and we will take over from there tomorrow when we return. So please come back, and thanks for tuning in today.